Good evening. I'm Kyle Clark. Thanks for joining us on 9 News Plus here for a more informal conversation about the first election results of Election Day 2023 in Colorado. Voting ended at 7 p.m., and that's when we got our first look at the results from ballots that were turned in before Election Day. Let's start with the statewide Proposition HH. This is the massive tax measure that's being pushed by Democrats, including Governor Jared Polis. And we've got about 200,000 ballots counted at this point. Bear in mind, 1.3 million ballots cast by earlier today. So these are the earliest of the early numbers. A 6-point margin for no on Prop HH. This is the measure which reduces some of the coming increase in property taxes by taking a portion or all of Tabor rebates in the coming years. Complex tax measure, but again, this is Democrats' proposed solution for skyrocketing property taxes. It trails in the very early vote counting. 200,000 ballots counted here. We know that there were 1.3 million ballots in earlier today. I'm going to jump to another item of interest in Denver, where the school board races have attracted more than $2 million in outside spending. Mike Johnston ran for mayor, saying that he was sick of the dysfunction on the school board, and while he did not support a mayoral takeover of the schools, he was interested in being more vocal about school board races and getting some other voices onto that board, which is held entirely by teachers' union-backed candidates. He made 3 endorsements of 3, you could call them reform candidates, but at the end of the day, they're backed by the mayor, they're backed by very wealthy interests that like charter schools a lot. The most prominent of these races is the at-large race. This is a citywide race. It pits John Youngquist, the former East High superintendent, the mayor's pick, versus Kwame Spearman, the former CEO of now bankrupt tattered cover bookstores, the union's pick. And in the early going, we flipped those numbers, folks. Let's take that down. We flipped those numbers. John Youngquist holds a commanding 63 to 12% lead over 63 to 25% lead in a 3-way race over Kwame Spearman. So again, that is the Denver School Board at-large race, the only school board race that everybody in Denver's voting on, and the mayor's pick, the charter school folks pick John Youngquist with an enormous lead in the early balloting. There, you've got a larger proportion of the ballots counted. You have 80,000 ballots counted out of a turnout of 92,000 pre-election day, and a total universe there of total registration and turnout of 535,000 folks there. The reform-backed candidates, mayoral-backed candidates, lead in the other 2 Denver school board races as well. I want to bring in 9 News political analysts Alton Dillard and Kelly Maher to talk about what we are seeing in Prop HH, that statewide measure. Opponents of HH want to be up big early in the night. Alton, why?
One of the reasons they want to be up early in the night is because you have to sort of counter the fact that the top voter demographic, as always, heading into any election are the 65 and ups. A lot of 65 and ups are homeowners. They're going to have a different stake than, say, the renters and the people who can't afford to live in Colorado. So it's going to be interesting, especially as some of the more outlying counties start reporting their numbers, to see if there's any swing.
So this is a weird one for a lot of different reasons, Kelly, but this one, Prop HH, might cut against the traditional trends that we see in which the conservative older vote gets in early, the liberal younger vote gets in later, because you got to think, a third of Coloradans are renters, and a lot of those folks might be younger, and it's a pretty tough case to say that renters make out well under HH because they lose a portion of their Tabor refunds and they're counting on the benevolence of their landlords to pass along property tax relief. So there might not be as big of a right to left swing on this as other things. Is that fair to say?
Well, and I think, a lot of these tax issues tend to be framed that way, right? Like the left wants more taxes and the right doesn't necessarily want more taxes. But one of the things I found really interesting about HH is that it actually pits a bunch of different governments against each other. So we've got Jared Polis and we've got the state government up here, and then we have the school boards down here, but then we have all of the counties. We have, CCI, which is the basically the county group coming out opposed to it. And then we have the largest number of governments in Colorado, which are these special districts that really get the pinch under that. So the question is where that messaging comes down. Did the renter thing actually permeate with young voters, and will they turn out? Unclear.
So now we are seeing some updated numbers on HH. We have additional ballots counted there. Again, these are ballots that came in before Election Day, and the no on HH camp is widening out to a significant 61-39% lead. This with nearly 500,000 ballots counted. So that is a little bit more than 1/3 of the pre-Election Day vote in. And that's probably where opponents of HH, the conservative groups, some of these municipal groups and so forth, that's where they wanted to see this number at this time of night. It's just such a difficult measure, too. People, number one question that we get, other than, what in the bejesus is Prop HH, is it going to pass, right?
Right.
And so what do we look to? We look to the past in Colorado. And Coloradans, even as the state has shifted left, have been averse to tax increases. Unless you're in Denver, in which case the only tax increase they ever voted down was for Mayor Hancock's signature stadium. That didn't happen. But statewide, even as Colorado's gone left, we voted down a lot of tax increases.
Except for sin taxes.
Except for, we do like to tax what is the weed and the tobacco.
And the tobacco on this
Yep.
one,
And that kind of
tobacco's
thing.
running away
Yeah.
by a wide margin.
Yeah, we haven't talked about II yet, but
Yeah, I hope that we don't, because that indicates that we were really stretching, because II is asking you to reapprove spending tobacco money on preschool that you already said that you wanted to do. That's one of those where you look at this and you're like, they got to ask me again? They're going to ask me again. Let's talk the Aurora mayor's race real quick. We want to bounce around and get to as many things as possible here, and then we're going to deep dive on some things. Very early numbers there, 40,000 votes in. Mike Kaufman, incumbent mayor, with a commanding 20-point lead over Juan Marcano, the Democrat on council. Again, these are municipal races, so everybody is running without party affiliations, so it's incumbent on voters to do their research and figure out where people stand. Mike Kaufman, former Republican congressman who lost his seat, held on to it probably a lot longer than most Republicans could due to changing demographics. He then became mayor of Aurora. He's got a conservative majority on city council. Juan Marcano, kind of the leader of the lefty opposition on council. Interestingly, he just renounced his membership in the Democratic Socialists because of their failure to condemn the Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel. So he was a DSA guy until very recently. If these kind of numbers were to hold for Mike Kaufman in Aurora, like an enormous double-digit victory, would that be a surprise to you, Alton?
Actually, it wouldn't, because for a couple of reasons. One, even when he was a congressman, Mayor Kaufman spent a lot of time in the immigrant and refugee communities, literally on the streets, and he has that kind of foot soldier. But the other thing, when we think of Aurora, people have a tendency to think Peoria corridor, Havana corridor. They don't think about 470 and Gartrell, Aurora. They don't think about the far south parts of Aurora that abut Douglas County. Out there, people are living in $750,000 homes, and they skew maybe a little more conservative than you may think when you just hear the word Aurora.
Sure, and Aurora has long been led by moderate Republicans, right?
Yes.
I mean, for a long time. And you look at Kaufman's race in 2019 when he beat Omar Montgomery, who I believe was head of the NAACP in Aurora. I think 6 points was the margin there. But at one point it looked very, very tight. But you got to remember, that was like a 5 or a 6-way race. Third place finisher was Ryan Frazier, who I believe I now have to say is either employed by 9 News or he comes on and talks like you guys. I don't know. He's on the morning show. I don't know what he does. He does a business thing on 9 News mornings. I'm sorry, I should have known that. Anyway, full disclosure.
But used to have...
He was the third place candidate in 2019 in Aurora. So while Mike Kaufman had a tight win in 2019, there were a lot more conservative votes out there.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I've been saying it for a decade. Every time he runs and wins, and that one time he didn't. I mean, nobody works harder than Mike Kaufman.
People who don't like Mike Kaufman say Mike Kaufman works hard.
Yes.
I mean, the guy gets up and does like 1 million push-ups and then goes all around Aurora and talks to everybody. And he is relentless. He was relentless in Congress, and I think that he's still relentless as mayor.
I'm looking now at the Aurora City Council at large, in which 2 incumbents hold narrower leads in that race. Allison Coombs, who's on the left, Curtis Gardner, who's on the right, currently lead in the pick 2 4-way race, but their leads are in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 percentage points not Mike Kaufman's 20-point lead over Juan Marcano. Before we move on to other things, just talking about Aurora. So this is the year that Kaufman and some of his conservative allies tried to put something on the ballot to essentially make Aurora a strong mayor city. So think like Denver, where the mayor gets to pick out a bunch of department heads, set the budget, runs the show, you know, whereas now, you know, Kaufman's kind of like the king of city council, you know, he gets to hang out on city council and he's one of them, you know. So they wanted to make Kaufman the strong mayor. And it was real shady who was behind this, unless you had two functioning brain cells to rub together. And you could be like, oh, I bet you the people who want to make Mike Kaufman the strong mayor are Mike Kaufman and his friends. And it turns out that was who it was. And after that, it all kind of fell apart. They shelved it for the year.
Yes.
So if Kaufman wins re-election, do you think he brings back the strong mayor thing? You know, make me a strong mayor like Denver has, and we can turn Aurora into the next generation city?
I think that it probably will come back. You know, now I think he would be term limited by the time it would actually appear on a ballot, perhaps. But yeah, there are some people who say that you know, form of government works because, as you mentioned, yeah, you know, right now he's on the dais with city council. I sort of jokingly refer to him like almost like a Kamala Harris. Sometimes he's a tiebreaker up there. But also with him is, I also think, as someone who represents what I like to call the fed up middle, I think his message on crime and people experiencing homelessness really resonated. Because even folks who were more in the center, the ones who were afraid to park their cars at DIA, the ones who were afraid to park at the Aurora Mall, the ones who were afraid to go to Southlands because people might be out there shooting, people are getting fed up, and I just think that message resonated, whereas his opponent, Marcano in particular, was talking about trying to ferret out and just, you know, dive into the root causes of the criminality. And when your car's missing, you don't care about the root causes. You care that your car is gone.
Yeah, I mean, conservatives in Colorado don't have a whole lot to celebrate these days. I mean, if you look at the spectrum in the state right now, it's just a fact at the most powerless point since pre-World War II. But Aurora, Aurora, not tonight, there's not. Just because those things aren't on the ballot. That's not a prediction. Those things are not on the ballot. This is an off-year election. We're talking about mayors and city councils and school boards. But Aurora is governed by conservatives. It is the most diverse city in the state, and it's governed by conservatives. And it has the ability to kind of say, look right across the line. Was it Havana? Look right across the line, and there you got Denver. Same set of problems, dealing with it one way. And we're going to deal with it a different way in Aurora. That's a pretty good test case if you're a conservative. You've got a city within your control, essentially.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I mean, overall, it seems to be working. I still have really high hopes for Mayor Johnston, frankly, because, you know, it's still early. He's still fairly new. But Aurora has always been a really fascinating kind of microcosm of everything else because it's... when Alton and I were growing up, you know, it's the place that kind of, the people from Aurora, you were like, you're Denver, but fully Denver, or, you know, and it was always just like the place that you wanted to see where it was headed versus now it's really coming into its own in terms of jobs, in terms of growth, in terms of, as Alton was talking about, you know, you're talking about a diverse city, but you're also talking about massive growth, and you're talking about massive economic growth. And it was always kind of the second sister to Denver, and it's really coming into its own.
Let's go back to Prop HH. If you are tuning in to find out what is going on in the world tonight in Colorado politics, you're looking at Prop HH. That is the property tax measure that's being promoted by the governor and a number of his Democratic allies, and right now it's taking it in the shorts. About 500,000 votes counted, approximately 20,000 votes have come in since the last time that we looked at this board, and the margin pretty much has not moved at that 20%. This was such a fascinating issue because it was either complex or deceptive, depending on who you talk to. And nobody denied the fact that it was very, very convoluted, tried to do a lot of things at once, and it could only get on the ballot doing a lot of things at once because it came from the state legislature. If you or I tried to put something like that on the ballot, they'd be like, slow your roll, come back with one idea, son. But the legislature can put on whatever they want, so they put on Prop HH, which fiddles with your Tabor refund, it fiddles with your property taxes, it moves some money into the pot for schools, that kind of, you know, it puts some money aside for renter assistance for people who might get evicted. It also equalizes Tabor refunds. So if you're somebody who makes a lot of money, pays a lot of taxes, then you would get a smaller refund, and somebody who pays less taxes will get more. That's a thing that Colorado Democrats like. They did that last time around with Tabor refunds. This would enshrine that idea moving forward as well. So it pulled a lot of levers, all at once. And I was really curious to know, and we may never really know, why are the people voting for it? Why are the people voting against it? Because it does so many things at once. When you step back, Alton, and you look at Prop HH, the tactic that Democrats used, how it was presented to voters, and how the message shaped up, what did you make of all of it?
Well, I made of that a couple things. One, it sort of speaks to how politics in general go now, because now we're to the point where we're having to parse and debate what are the facts. So to your references about the Tabor refunds, do we get them back or not? That was never clear. That was clear as mud. One side was saying you're not going to get your Tabor if this goes this way, and the other side saying, well, it's not going to affect Tabor whatsoever, you know.
Because everybody picks their favorite economic forecast. Exactly. That's what happens. Everybody picks their favorite economic forecast and says, if this happens, then that's what's going to happen with your Tabor refund. Please go on.
Yes, and so with the Tabor refund part, I think it was a combination of that and then just the, like you said, the convolutedness of it. And I've worked with voters for most of my career, and even to your reference earlier about Aurora Council at large, some people don't follow the instructions to vote for two candidates in a multi-candidate race. And so, or do you think they're going to parse out the economics of this? So I think it's a combination of the confusion. And I think that's where I'm hanging my hat on this one. I just think that it was a lot for people to try to digest. And as you've reported, since it sounds like there's no immediate backup plan in place, now all eyes are going to be on the dome to figure out what the next move is, because I don't see those numbers swinging. That's a large margin.
Yeah, so Governor Jared Polis has the ability to call a special session of the legislature and say, come up with another way to deal with skyrocketing property taxes other than HH. He has been asked a million times by us and everybody else, what will you do if this thing goes down in flames? And right now it's a 5-alarm situation. He has refused to say what he would do, if he would call the legislature back, what he would ask them to try and accomplish, and most importantly, what the Democrats who hold the legislature want to do with this situation. Because remember, Republicans have their smallest minority in history in the legislature. So unless Democrats defect en masse, the solution here is going to be whatever Democrats want it to be. And when we'd ask the governor about it, he'd say, gee golly whiz, who knows what those crazy Democrats are going to do, as if he's not the leader of the Colorado Democrats. You know, it'd be like, I don't know what the legislature can pass. And the fact that his land use bill failed in the legislature suggests he may not actually know what the legislature is going to pass, but he's got to have some idea. And the fact that he would not indicate any kind of plan B really put before voters, if you want property tax relief, this is the only way that you can get it, Prop HH, because we may not give you another shot. Does he have to give people another shot by going to legislature, or could you see him saying, nope, you said no to HH, enjoy your tax bill?
Yeah, you know, I think that Alton made a really good point that it was very complicated and it was very convoluted, but I think that I watched people as they got their new assessments. And when you're talking about especially older voters who are the ones that primarily vote in these off-year elections, these are people who, 65 and up in Colorado, 99% of whom are homeowners, right? Yeah. So the question becomes then, do they show up figuratively with pitchforks? Because this was a really scary season for people who are paying property taxes. And for some people who are on fixed incomes, the combination of property taxes along with increased food, gas, energy, like it all becomes really tight squeezed very fast, and they're going to be looking for some kind of relief. And this is kind of, you know, the combination of the Gallagher and Tabor question that we've been talking about for 10 years. And it ultimately, I think he has no choice but to call a special session, because he's enjoying some of the most popular, he has some of the best ratings of any governor in all of the country. And he clearly has some kind of desire to run for something in the future, maybe or maybe not president of the United States. So he needs to figure that out.
I think, I mean, here you really see, in perhaps the starkest contrast, the danger for Democrats in one-party rule in Colorado, because here there's a problem, right? Property taxes are skyrocketing, and the only folks who don't see it as a problem are the folks who are on the true blue progressive left. They're like, yeah, raise those property taxes, baby. Fund the government, you know, let's get more in line with a bunch of other states. But you've got a larger consensus that they're not interested in a big property tax spike, at least not all at once. So there's a problem that everybody agrees on, and truly, this is a situation where only one party can fix it. Republicans can't fix this.
And that's what's going to be so interesting to watch because, you know, and I've got a lot of Democratic friends, but they are some of the worst at majority politics that I have seen in my entire career. So you have to balance that out against our libertarian governor and some of his wishes. I know what he's registered as, but he's a libertarian. Let's just call that what it is also. And so by the time it rolls into seeing what the solution is going to be, are they going to take their supermajority and say, you know what, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to stand by this and go down with it if it goes down in flames again? But are they going to take the stand, or are they going to try to find the comfortable middle that just gets them beat up on both sides? That's what I'm going to be keeping an eye out for.
They may feel like they've got the margin to take a beating and still win based on where elections have been in Colorado lately. I just think this is just such a difficult situation for the governor, and maybe that's why he's fled the state tonight. He didn't flee. No, I'm sorry. He's at a Western Governors Association conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we're told he's unavailable to speak tonight. But again, he's not in the state. But the thing that's so difficult for him is the Republicans, you know, all 6 of them at the state capitol, have called his bluff and said, you know, you've said that in a perfect world, I would love to just lower the tax rate. And then that way there's not as much to refund to people with Tabor. And that's what we should do. And Republicans have been like, great, we'll vote for that. Let's do that. Crickets.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So the thing that's, and that's where he squeezes other Democrats when he goes up and talks to the conservatives at the Steamboat Institute or wherever else and talks about how he wants to, you know, eliminate the income tax and cut property taxes and everything else. Then you got a little Republican minority at the Capitol that's like, let's go, Gov. Let's do it.
Let's roll.
But I mean, the Republicans don't have the ability to move forward that solution at the Capitol.
Correct.
What to you feels likely?
I think what is likely is we're going to see the fissure that is within the Democrat Party right now is going to continue to widen and deepen, right? Like, this is, John Hickenlooper, when he was governor, like, Bill Cadman was his favorite guy.
Republican Senate, majority leader. That long ago.
That long ago.
Sorry.
Ouch. But having a check on the system for John Hickenlooper was huge for him because he didn't get all of the most bananas stuff out of his caucus. And frankly, Jared Polis is going to have to figure out how to walk this line. And if you looked at what happened with some of the state house races, especially in Denver this last election, he's going to have a really hard time with some of them.
Because a portion of that caucus is sliding
super left,
way to the progressive,
not just left, like Democrat socialists,
and folks who are not happy at the Capitol to just be a no vote and go quietly into the night.
Right.
They want to be loud about why they think that their party is not reflecting what they believe to be their party's values. That's tough for the governor.
It is in fact reminiscent of what we saw when the Tea Party came in on Republicans and said, you're a rhino, we're going to take you out, we're going to primary you. This is all coming full circle, and now it's happening on the Democrat side. And now Jared Polis has to figure out how to walk this line, and he has to do that with voters who now are really pinched on property taxes.
Yeah. Let's take another look at where Prop HH stands, the governor's signature tax plan. We've got another 200,000 votes counted. We're now up to half of the total by election day, and this thing continues to get de-pantsed by a 20% margin. That is significant, and in order for that to turn around, you would have to have the folks who vote later come in just overwhelming number in a fervor for Prop HH, which, as I've observed this, you just never really felt the passion behind HH, right? You had a lot of people on the left making wonky arguments for why they thought it was a good solution to a complex set of problems. You had a fired up conservative base about don't you do this, don't you take Tabor refunds. But the lefty fire just never really seemed to be there on this one. I don't know if it's how it came about or how it was structured or whether it's an off year and the world is in chaos. Like, I don't know what it is, but it just never really felt like it was there.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it really caught fire. And like you mentioned earlier, as far as the, lack of single subject, because it really became a bit almost of an omnibus with all the things that it was trying to shore up. And that was one of the things that Kelly and I were talking about earlier, were like things like education funding. Why don't we do something radical like fund education? Why does it have to be tied to marijuana? Why does it have to be tied to HH? Why does it have to be tied to tobacco? Why don't we, fund our schools?
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, right, this is now going to become a problem that is not going away.
Yeah.
This is a thing that is now here. And I think going back to the point you made, Kyle, about how it came about, like dropping it last minute 2 days before the end of session and then just forcing it through in a way that was so convoluted, and it was supposed to be simple, and yet 12 pages of the blue book, which is descriptions. And oftentimes what we see with voters is that when things look really oddly complicated, they will just vote no, which is why, although I know Alton and I disagree about Tabor, it took several bites at that apple, even with a more conservative electorate in Colorado at the time, in order to pass Tabor, because these large and complicated things are tough to get through for people who look at the blue book, see 12 pages, are like, this seems sketch.
Yeah. So here we are, 4 years removed from Prop CC, which was an attempt to end Tabor refunds, put the money towards, I think, transportation to schools. Governor backed that. That went down in flames. Now we've got this attempt to ratchet back Tabor. How much? Depends on which forecast you like. And it looks like voters are rejecting that by a wide margin. Is that an argument for a straight-up Tabor repeal or just leaving it alone if you're a Democrat?
You know what? I think there's a leave it alone factor, because the other thing Kelly and I were talking about, because like she said, we have a slight disagreement on Tabor, but as someone who's worked in the actual administration of elections, people in the 90s, because of the convolutedness of Tabor, put it in the state constitution. That's why we are in the boat we're in today, is because it's embedded in the Constitution. Anything that's simply in statute, they can just fix under the dome. So because the other thing I think on this is that we have those sort of two camps, because I'm with you. There are going to be people out there with pitchforks with those high valuations. But then there's
Figurative pitchforks. Super important in this landscape.
Yes,
Yeah.
in this landscape, make sure we don't have people with actual farm implements on the steps of the Capitol.
What a shame that an armed violent mob had to ruin that metaphor for all of us forever. But
Right.
here we are, so we have to say metaphorical pitchforks.
Metaphorical
Yes,
pitchforks.
please.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's where that is. Again, if you're just joining us, Denver school board race. At this point, Mayor Mike Johnston's preferred candidates, the so-called reform candidates backed by a lot of charter school interest money, hold leads in their races. No lead wider than that in the at-large school board race, in which John Youngquist, former East High principal, is up by almost 40 points on Kwame Spearman. Kwame Spearman had a cup of coffee in the mayor's race and managed to stake out some unusually conservative positions for the city of Denver. He vacated that race. Then he vacated his role as CEO of Tattered Cover Bookstore as that place went through financial and some, I guess you could say, I don't know what you say, interpersonal struggles. And then he jumped into the school board race, said he wanted to focus on politics as his career. Kelly can tell you about how politics as a career doesn't always work out for the best for everybody. But in the early going, 80,000 votes counted in that at-large school board race, and John Youngquist holds a tremendous lead there. The other two Denver school board races right now, District 1, the incumbent Scott Balderman, down 11 points to the challenger, mayoral endorsed Kimberly Sia. And in District 5, the incumbent Charmaine Lindsay is down by a whopping 36 points to Marlene De La Rosa. Big ups to our team for having this on graphics. How many graphics do we have, friends? That's a lot of graphics. But anyway, that gives you a look at where things are in the Denver Public Schools. We're going to step away in a couple of minutes here so that we can go grab a bite to eat and a drink of water before we resume things on 9 News at 9 on KTVD Channel 20. But let's just briefly talk about this Denver School Board race. This would suggest one of a couple of things, all right? Either people are really sick of the public dysfunction in the Denver School Board, which was really something to behold, especially when confronted by the crisis of public school safety after a number of shootings.
Yes.
The board lashed out at critics in the media, internal critics, and never really moved the ball in a significant way on the issue of public safety. This also could suggest that Mayor Mike Johnston, hot off his win, has got a little sway, and he's got some deep-pocketed friends who came in and spent a lot of money to put his sway on TV ads and in mailers and things like that. How much does he attribute to Johnston, to the state of DPS? Thoughts?
I attribute a little to Johnston because one of the things that people forget is the Denver Public Schools is actually a state level office. It is not an arm of city government. And so the fact that he doubled down to the extent that he did proved that he was taking some of that momentum. But the other part is definitely the safety thing. And see, the fact that we're even still having to talk about stabbings at schools, shootings at schools, videotaped jumpings at schools, and the Denver Public School Board in its current iteration tried to bunker down, they tried to excuse it away, and this is a classic example of people saying the status quo is not working. So yes, there's the dysfunction, and then there's also the fact that the Denver Public Schools is probably one of the most neutered elected bodies that I've ever seen in my life. And so it's like every time I check the org chart, it's like, but the superintendent reports to you. What seems to be the disconnect here? And they went to the policy governance model, which means no policy and no governance as far as I've been able to see.
Yeah, and the policy governance model is what gets you the discipline matrix, which is how they make decisions on hot-button issues like the fact that students who are charged in a criminal court with violent crimes up to and including attempted murder are then mainstreamed back into classrooms at the direction of the district over the objection of school safety personnel, school principals, prosecutors, so on and so forth.
Teachers.
Yeah, so even if the mayor's 3 picks, the 3 reformers get onto the board, there's still going to be a board minority in Denver. But you might think that some different voices in the room might change the conversation, because then again, there's also going to be a departing voice, which is that of Board Director Aontai Anderson, who, after receiving the first censure that we know of in the history of the DPS board for online flirtations with underage girls, is now going to run for State House District 8 Leslie Herod seat that she's vacating due to term limits. He's going to go do that. So his voice leaves the room.
Yes.
It would appear that 2 to 3 new voices enter the room. What's a path forward for the DPS board look like?
I mean, probably some therapy.
They've tried that. They brought in somebody to teach them how to talk to each other.
But
They've already, maybe a new therapist.
Right.
They've tried therapy.
But ultimately, changing the board dynamic is going to happen slowly over time, and Mike Johnston understands that. And frankly, taking the step to really weigh in and use some of that political capital to say, hey, I am the mayor of Denver, but I understand that although this is a completely separate organization, that what happens at the education level bubbles up for the entire city is really important. And thus far, it looks like he spent his political capital wisely as opposed to the governor, who maybe did not as well. But the change of those dynamics is how that's going to slowly change over time.
And I just have one more quick thing on that, because as we were talking about earlier, it's not like Denver City Council, so only half of the board turns over in this election one way or the other. But I also know that there is a pretty vigorous effort out there trying to get the entire board to resign, who may now flip the switch and go into recall mode. Because again, the safety thing, and like Director Anderson mentioned, there's a bunch of Denver come latelys now wanting to hop into the union versus reform thing. This is a mandate on safety and keeping our kids safe.
Yeah, if the results hold and some reformers get on the Denver School Board, then all those folks who have got those resign DPS board lawn signs are going to have to Sharpie them so they say resign most of the DPS board. But like Alton said, that puts a recall kind of within striking distance. Well, they said, the folks in charge here at 9 News, hey, you want to get on 9 News Plus and talk for a couple of minutes about the results when they come in. And here we are 45 minutes later because it's an interesting evening, even in an off year. We're going to continue this conversation on 9 News at 9 o'clock on KTVD Channel 20. One last look at Prop HH before we leave you here. 900,000 votes counted, 1.3 million were in before Election Day, and the lead widens. Proposition HH, Governor Polis's tax measure, is getting smoked like brisket. We will see you on 9 News at 9.
Woof.